Appreciate everybody joining today. With me, myself, Michael Goad. I'm one of our CDW Mobility Solution Architects. I'm dedicated to our healthcare practice. I cover everything Central and East. I am really a technical overlay for your sales counterpart. And then with me as well is my field counterpart, Mike Elrod. I've been working with Mike probably this is going 4 or 5 years now. So he's been a strategic part of everything that I do with our healthcare customers. So I'll let him introduce himself a little bit as well.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for spending some time with us today. I think this is a pretty fun topic to explore, so I hope you walk away with some good information today.
Really, what we want to talk to you guys about is what monitor management is. It will cover what tools and capabilities you should really look for in a UEM. So this is an important one that I feel like with how much Microsoft has changed Windows 10, it's important that, hey, we're managing iOS and Android, possibly looking at Windows 10. You know, my investment in my MDM, can it work? Can it do Windows 10? So we're gonna at least help you understand what tools and capabilities are there from what you've invested in, or maybe you should look outside of, as well as what are the phases of modern management. So as we approach Windows, it's really a journey. It's not something that I typically see customers say, great, we're just gonna go all in with Windows 10 with our MDM. It's not that. It's more of a journey. So helping you guys understand what phases, what features, capabilities should you start introducing and make that and phase that approach as we add more capabilities and stuff like that. And then if we've got time, we'll do a live demo for you as well. So show you a little bit what capabilities you can look for in a UEM, as well as some analytics and data that typically we see around Windows 10 as well. So with Microsoft Windows 10, it really is Microsoft has changed a lot of what Windows is. You know, with Windows 7, if we wanted a management, it was you know, through an MDM. It was all through agents. Traditionally, we have traditional setups like SCCM and BigFix that typically do a lot of our management on here. But Microsoft has made very strategic investments into Windows 10 and really has built it like an iOS or an Android operating system, where there's certain configurations directly that you can manage directly through an MDM or a UEM, a Unified Endpoint Management System, and it's all cloud-based. So that's the biggest change that we're starting to see with Windows 10. So getting into what is modern management, it's a couple different things. So historically, you know, where we're at right now, everyone, it's usually common knowledge that Windows 7 is end of life. So we're starting to see, I'm starting to see a lot of customers that are trying to figure out their Windows 10 migration. Some of them have started that, some of them are a little bit behind the curve, and some are already there. So this challenge is, okay, we're moving to Windows 10. It's changing a lot of my approach of typical management. Really, with modern management, it's like I mentioned, it's Microsoft has built it to be like an iOS and an Android, so that we can manage it through a UEM, an MDM client. There's checkboxes that we can manage things like BitLocker and do local configuration on those devices without the need of imaging. And all this is done via your cloud, via UEM component. And to me, that is really important because it allows us to be much more dynamic in the way that we manage Windows devices. So, you know, if we send out a device and for someone reading it, it's misconfigured, it's missing something, the Wi-Fi profile is just not sitting up there correctly, you know, it's just a matter of going into a console, updating the Wi-Fi cert and sending it out there, and that misconfigured device is now properly communicating on the network. So a lot of really great capabilities, and to me, it just allows an admin to be more dynamic in supporting those devices. And then it's really just rethinking your approach to traditional ways of managing. Like I mentioned, typically I see, you know, traditional tools like SCCM and IBM. I don't think those are going away at all. I think they'll still be there, but the idea of being able to, maybe we have a set image in there and we're going to image those devices, but now I can more dynamically manage those after the fact. So if something is misconfigured, instead of sending that device back, going through the re-image process, which, you know, some takes a couple hours. I've said some organization that it takes a couple weeks. So, you know, we can just hybrid approach of putting a UEM on there and dynamically managing everything else outside of the image. So that's where I really see Microsoft Windows 10 and an approach with UEM going. And to kind of give you guys a little bit of preview of what that looks like. Here I've just got a typical device going, and I'm just going through the typical setup assistant. And you guys will see here that as I go through this, if you're familiar with Apple DEP, where we kind of just hit Wi-Fi and have the device provision itself, we can do a very similar experience with Windows, where this is called Azure's, oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank on the name of this already. AutoPilot. But this is, Microsoft has built these in here, so we can integrate our MDMs, whether that's an AirWatch, Workspace ONE, a Mobile Iron, an Intune, whatever that may be. And then that experience is very similar to what we do like on an Apple device, where, boot it up, hit Wi-Fi, and the device checks in, says, "Hey, I belong to this organization. Put in your AD creds," and the device provision itself. And what you're seeing here is we're doing things like even changing the smart menu, the start menu, and the taskbar, where we're configuring all those different components of the device to make sure that the experience that our end users have is standardized. And as this goes through here, you kind of see we've got this catalog where users can install applications, or in this case, Workspace ONE is installing on their behalf. So we're loading applications, we're doing certain configurations on here, doing things like BitLocker, ensuring the device is encrypted, pushing down antivirus and stuff like that. So again, this could work in tandem with an image, or if we're just sending these out to things like our physicians or something like that, where devices we can't fully control in that manner, this is a great solution to that, just because it gives us all that dynamic control. And just kind of a nice visual of traditionally what we see. Traditionally, Windows 7 deployment is high touch. We're sending that into IT. They're putting an image on there. They're going through all that configuration and looking at our approach with modern management at UEM. It's really out of the box. What you guys just saw here, just give it to a physician. Step 1, turn it on. 2, hit Wi-Fi. 3, wait for everything to happen. And that configuration is, typically also with configuration with SCCM, traditionally we have to be on the network or we have to be VPN'd in order for SCCM to do its work. Using a UEM, it's just like iOS and Android. I don't care what network you're on. I'm going to be able to configure that device, make sure that it's compliant all the time, checking in. And then patching is a big one. So there's a lot of cool things we can do with Windows updates, whether we're using a peer-to-peer network or if we're going to utilize those Windows updates through Microsoft Cloud Services, we can configure all of that. So, I've been in multiple situations where suddenly my Windows endpoint gives me 45 minutes to start, or decides to start on its own. So a lot of configuration we can do there around app management and then just security as a whole. Traditionally, what I have seen is something like this. This is a common use case I see. Everyone may have different differences around there, but traditionally, we send a device to an end user. They get that device, and then suddenly it's not working properly. It's misconfigured, Wi-Fi is not working, or the applications aren't there, or anything like that. So what we do is we ship that device back to IT, and we ship them a new device. In the meantime, while that device is being shipped, it's in this gray area of now we got to reconfigure this device, and how long does that take? It may take a day, hours, or sometimes it may take weeks. And then finally, once we reconfigure that, we can send that back out and into rotation for our clinicians. So it's, that could be a very long process. Where UEM helps is being able to, hey, we send that out day 1. It's not working day 1. Let me go into my UEM, figure out what's not working, and update that configuration in real time. And then the rest of that 2-week process is null. Well, we fixed it, we've troubleshooted it in day 1. So those are some of the power that I would typically see from UEM using Windows 10. So what to look for in a modern management platform, or UEM? And I refer to UEM. You guys, a very common term is MDM. EMM. So UEM is really just the evolution of that. So, but MDM is a common term there. So what I look for, what I recommend when you guys are looking into, I kind of want to, I'm here, I've got iOS and Android, now I want to manage Windows 10. The things that I recommend looking for is whatever you're going to invest in, make sure that it does everything. iOS and Android it's a very mature space for managing iOS and Android devices. Pretty much I would say most MDMs or EMMs are going to be able to do this for you and do it fairly well. There's a lot of differences in the UEMs and what they can do and can't do on Windows devices. devices. So when you're looking to invest in a platform, I recommend making sure that it can accommodate everything, because the last thing I want to do as an admin is have multiple different consoles to do something. So I have my iOS devices in one, my Android in another, and then my Windows devices in another. I see that quite often, but we're at a point where the UEM really consolidate that. And when we consolidate, there's a lot more tools we have on here. So you see the kind of the bubble I have for insight and automation. When we can put all our devices into a single console, it allows us to look at data a lot differently. It allows us to look at things like all my devices secure, what are some trends in my devices, and stuff like that. So it's when we can consolidate that, we get a lot more insights and analytics and automation around that.
Yeah, thanks, Mike Goad there. So, he mentioned rethink and this modernization, this digital workspace. And another thing you're going to want to look for in a UEM is a focus of the collective. And what I mean by the collective is the ability to hone in on a couple of user experiences. So this hub and spoke you see here represents what I like to look at as three particular user experiences. The first being the employee or the coworker, and the ability to gain day one access to their applications, have an easy, simplified onboarding experience, if not just outright provide self-service. And we've seen a lot of that on the iOS, Android, and to a degree, the Mac OS side historically, but that's part of this evolution in this ability to drive better productivity for the end user. So the second experience here would be for the security, InfoSec, cybersecurity, being able to pull that group in to give them integrated visibility, right? Being able to enable them to gain deep insights into what's happening on the endpoints. Maybe it's a critical vulnerability that needs to be patched. They can give that feedback to IT ops, who can initiate a remediation workflow by really getting granular with the user group and the segment. Maybe it's a particular population of EMR terminals. Maybe it's just a small set of clinician devices running particular Windows 10 build that need a patch. IT ops can ingest that information from InfoSec and go hit that and take that down real fast. And then the third would be IT ops, right? So the day-to-day admin team that are managing the general lay of the land, right? The everyday user, the everyday configuration, checking on updates, checking on patching, and applying that. I really like to think of that as, kind of the overall environmental hygiene, making sure that we can quickly react as well as build in the proper automation and data points to have really awesome predictive and proactive workflows and processes in place to keep this overall experience absolutely at a high level for everybody that's using these machines as well as supporting them. Back to you, Mr. Goad.
Yeah. And the third piece here is GPO management. So one of the biggest challenges I see when I talk to people about, rethinking how we manage Windows 10 and looking at a UEM is I hear a lot is I've got, hundreds or even thousands of GPOs. How am I going to manage those through a UEM? So when you're investing into a UEM platform, make sure that it can do GPO management. What you guys are seeing here is a screenshot from Workspace ONE, but it's just give you an idea of, UEMs have strategic partnerships with Microsoft that allow them to import a lot of this. So Microsoft has something called a baseline. That's the UEM's version of a GPO. So when we're going into a UEM, we can configure all the things like remote desktop services and everything that we typically would do from a GPO standpoint. Gives us a nice GUI around it. When you are looking into invest into that platform, it's important to make sure that we can accommodate our GPOs, because while Microsoft is continually evolving Windows 10 and bringing out CSPs, which is those check boxes essentially that you would typically see in a UEM, there's still a lot of components that aren't there that have to be managed through GPO or something like that. So when you are investing, make sure that that platform can do that. And the fourth here is deployment or managing patches. So the challenge that I've seen is it's a pain point for a lot of organizations of managing patches, making sure their devices are up to date. Even in August of 2019, we saw something called the Seven Monkeys. This was seven vulnerabilities that were critical vulnerabilities. I think there were 8 or 9 on the CV on the CV that pretty much said, these affect all devices, and they specifically affected remote desktop services. So what we've seen is Microsoft has really changed their whole structure around Windows updates. We're at a much quicker rollout of Windows updates. So it's become a challenge for updating images every 6 months or even faster to maintain security updates and stuff like that. Even in the news, you've seen tons of Microsoft issues serious Windows 10 updates warnings and stuff like that. We see them all the time. We looked at the data last year, and there were 26 minor 26 security updates alone. So that's 26 times, and that equals to more than 2 updates a month. So how do we manage those? It's UEM can be I'll show you guys in the live demo of how we manage Windows updates, but a UEM can be a great force there because we can utilize Microsoft's cloud services. So even though if a device isn't connected to the network and touching SCCM in some manner, but we need to get this vulnerability fixed and patched, a UEM can use Microsoft's cloud services to pull that out and make sure those devices are updated, and then also giving you a log of which devices are and have not been patched.
Yeah, and I think that's some pretty good context here, right? Again, as we migrate to a single unified management console, that the ability to ingest the CVE database and provide InfoSec visibility into our devices, whether it be 100, whether it be 50,000 Windows 10 devices in particular, having this collaborative environment where InfoSec can identify the most critical CVEs and be able to dissect the data, right? As we collect and identify all the different types of Windows 10 devices, right? Chipsets, OEMs, plus the different builds they may be on for a variety of reasons, we can get that much more granular, fine-grained control in determining who needs which patch and start to prioritize the patching as well. And as Mr. Goad said, having that continuous monitoring on the backside to see the success greatly reduces that 1 in 10 takes a year or more to deploy a patch. And combine that with the fact that Microsoft released 26 patches last year and then now just 2 in January, we want to be able to keep pace with that. We want to be less reactive or shorten that reactive window, knowing that patching is pretty much a reaction. But we want to shorten that window and increase the success odds as these devices come on and off our network too.
Yeah. Great point, Mike. Appreciate it. And the last thing that I recommend when we're looking at, what UEM should I invest in, what capabilities and tools should I look at, making sure that your UEM support AutoPilot. So I mentioned that a little bit earlier, but AutoPilot is that DEP type experience where we take a device, we hit Wi-Fi, and it provisions itself. So like I said, most MDMs, UEMs are going to support this at that point, as well as Windows itself, and then your resellers like CDW. But just another area of what should I look for. This is another one. So our next one is getting into deployment phases. I'm going to hand this off to Elrod as well.
Yeah, appreciate that. So probably worth a disclaimer that the migration of Windows 10 from legacy PC lifecycle management systems to modern management is a journey. It's one that will take time, and to a degree, many organizations, certainly within healthcare, are starting this journey as they start to adopt cloud SaaS-based internet-facing applications, right? So as that migration from the user productivity suite continues to go to the cloud, now we start to see the endpoint itself deconnect or disassociate from the network, from the domain. So here you have an example of a adoption process, and one of the things you're seeing here, more particular if you kind of pan out from the details, is really a test implement relationship. So depending on how fast or how slow and how risk adverse or risk, aggressive your organization is, depends on how many stages you might have. If you're really quick to adopt technology, you might shorten this adoption process up a little bit. If you're a bit more risk adverse and you're slow to adopt, again, you might have more stages. So what you see here is not by any stretch a Bible, if you will, of like, this is what you should do. This is more an example of a risk adverse organization that took their time having one team test and prepare essentially the components, the services, that if you will, that went into the implementation stage. So bottom left, up right, and they kept going. They worked in tandem. So it wasn't necessarily one team that handled this. It was really two teams to keep that flow and that methodology consistent. And in this particular example, you see things that this example customer or environment, they came to the conclusions that, look, in our case, we can go to GPO rationalization faster than we could patch management. Again, there's going to be some variety of reasons there, right? Maybe you have an existing patch management solution where you're just going to run out the support contract or licensing arrangement for. And that could be the same thing with encryption for that matter. If you're using third-party encryption, you may continue to use that until your contract runs out, and then you would slide in a BitLocker. Bigger point here, though, is you're going to go through an adoption rationalization to determine what's the easiest, what are the hardest, and then build that into how you begin to migrate from legacy to modern management. Next. And of course, one of the harder things to kind of wrap your head around is the GPO itself, okay? And up front, because GPOs have been built and layered on top of old OS versions, many of them probably aren't going to migrate directly into a modern management framework. So you're going to want to spend time, if not look at solutions that can provide you some middleware, some different services, technology, software-based services to help you go through this rationalization. But you're going to want to go through and see which GPOs can quickly, easily migrate into a UEM-based profile, configuration setting, or compliance policy, right? So that kind of green layer there. Which of our GPOs have a cousin, have a twin, if you will? Cousin's probably not great, a twin, but on the UEM side. So we just start using a UEM setting. Second from that, you're going to start to go, all right, maybe there's not a direct correlation there. What about using Microsoft CSPs and being able to rationalize the GPO to a CSP and being able to build that into the framework? Ultimately, be prepared not to be relevant or not possible to migrate. You'll then start to deprecate those GPOs. But here's a big place for you to really think about, consider, and plan for during your migration, both, and again, you saw in the adoption phase, where do we start to pull in the GPO concept and ideology, if not just the general kind of policies themselves? You're going to have a couple ways to do that. Again, plan for deprecating some because they just simply aren't relevant or applicable to modern management. I think we're on to the demo. If there's no questions.
We're on to the demo. So I'll go in and I'll show you guys what. I'm going to be utilizing VMware's Workspace ONE just because it's I have access to this lab and among others, but what we do see Workspace ONE as being one of the more popular ones in the healthcare space, at least within the Central and the East, and I think it's got a lot of capabilities. So not to say that it's the only one out there. We've kind of gone over what you should look for, but we are just for this demo case, I am using Workspace ONE. So, what are some typical things that we would see from building out profiles within MDM. So I'm going to go here I'll go to my Windows 10 example here. So my start menu. So this is if we're iOS or Android admins, this is all looks familiar. So there's not a lot of change as far as building Windows profiles versus building iOS and Android profile. We can do things like managing the password, managing the Wi-Fi certificate, and stuff like that. WPA2, username, password, whatever that may be. But looking here, we can manage things. So if we're using native firewall tools, we can manage Windows natively through the EU app, as well as the antivirus here. So we can set some firewall rules. We can also utilize antivirus here. This is going to be Windows Defender. So if we are using a Symantec, McAfee, or whatever, you're going to really push that application through EM, but you're not going to manage it natively here. But if we are using Windows Defender, that can be managed here. Windows updates. This is a big one. So there's a lot of things we can do around here. So we can utilize two different services from Windows updates. So we can utilize the cloud. So we're gonna push out a configuration that says, hey, we need this patch, and it's going to auto approve and pull that from Microsoft's own cloud. Great when our users are off network and it's an urgency there. But or we can, if we've got a dedicated WinSUS server, in our environment, we can utilize that as well. So and I've definitely seen a hybrid approach where we'll have certain, we'll create multiple profiles where, these set of devices get the cloud version, these get our WinSUS. So a lot of cool things that we can do there, as well as just manage the behavior of the update. So I manage, I'm sure everyone's been in that area where Microsoft wants to restart your computer for an update. So we can dictate when those devices are restarting, and as well as certain update policies as well. So scanning engines and stuff like that. The encryption, we mentioned BitLocker. So we can enable BitLocker. Make sure. We can do things like complete hard disk system, or only a certain system partition. So a lot of times I've worked with organizations where this is actually their entry into Windows 10, where they may have additional tools for BitLocker management. So this becomes their one tool for not only managing the devices, but also managing BitLocker. There's a lot of cool things we can do here. We can escrow the key for self-service or for an admin, for BitLocker management and stuff like that. We can make sure that the BitLocker cannot be suspended, that the users can't turn it off and stuff like that, create a static BitLocker recovery key and stuff like that. So a lot of cool things we can do to natively manage BitLocker. Additionally, we can do things like custom settings. So this is where you would put things like if there's a GPO that just can't be migrated, or we have a power script for it, we can put in custom settings here. For this custom setting, previously you guys saw that when we went through that kind of like CAN demo of that device enrolling, and we saw the start menu change. This is all where you would put it. So in here, I created a custom layout that kind of, when the device enrolls, it's going to change that start menu layout. So there's some cool stuff that we can do there, as well as personalization. This is where I find it much easier to do it through EM versus through other tools. So personalization allows us to change things like the desktop image, the lock screen wallpaper, start menu, XML through there as well, and then gives us some configuration of start menu. So allowing documents, allowing network access. We can turn things like in the system bin, we can disable so a user can't turn off Bluetooth, or that just doesn't even show up for them. So some easy click boxes to managing some UI things around the device as well. Anything that anyone wants to specifically see on here? Great. In addition to just managing the device, let's exit out here. Oh, bugger. There we go. The UEM can be a place where you can manage your applications. So we can push out .exes, .msis, and have the full configuration around those applications as well. So it's not only an engine for managing, certain configurations and restrictions on the device, but it can turn into your way of managing those applications. I'll even go into there's a unique piece to VMware Workspace ONE called Intelligence that not only allows us to push out applications, but actually verify if those applications are being used, which comes down to, are we paying, do we have licenses out for all these applications, and 20% of our users aren't even using it. So some cool things that a UEM can do, but it is an application management system as well. On top of that, the UEM, we can look at certain devices in here, and we can also, some of the UEMs will have integrations with like TeamViewer, or they'll have native integration for their own remote assistant here. But if you look up a Windows device, you can hit this more actions, at least within Workspace ONE, and we can do things like enterprise wipe the device, reboot the device, wipe the device, which is completely nuclear option. But we do have some of those controls as well. My console's not updated yet, but typically you would also be able to troubleshoot that device. So a lot of them with that integration of TeamViewer or others, you can actually use the UEM to go into that device and remotely assist that device. So some cool things that we can do here. And I mentioned that intelligence piece. Yes, please stay logged in. So this is one of my favorite things about, at least within Workspace ONE, but some really cool things we can do around insights. So we mentioned CVEs and everything specifically. So one of the things that's when we're moving to a UEM to manage our Windows devices, we want to specifically do things like manage our patches. So in here, I can go in and look at CVEs. So I can see right now that I've got some devices that are actually vulnerable to some CVEs. And if I want to go in and understand what that CVE is, I can look at it directly. We can go into Microsoft documentation to understand what that CVE actually is. So a really good way to just look at as a whole what devices are vulnerable. Looking at my policy risk. So as all my devices, iOS, Android, Windows as a whole, what devices, what's going on? I have, certain platforms within, I have some policy violations, whether that be as, someone disabled their PIN code or stuff like that. So some really cool ways to look at your dashboard and devices as a whole. But when I get into my dashboards, again, these are tools and capabilities that I recommend you look into when you're looking to invest into a platform. But looking at things like device utilization, we can go into building out, seeing how many devices are enrolled, how many active users that I have across all my different operating systems. So this is important. When I mentioned that, it's looking at all the devices. If we just had Windows devices in here, we'd be very limited in looking at the rest of our environment. So giving us the capability of just understanding what devices are out there, how many users are active, and building out even dashboards just to look at battery health and stuff like that. So I'll go into this automation here, but
and one thing I wanted to add here is every dashboard you're seeing here, there are preset or pre-canned dashboards. You can customize your own. The kind of additional benefit here is that you can also give delegated roles, right? So you can give someone just an intelligence role within the Workspace ONE. And again, this is something you should be considering for any UEM platform, is the ability to give a really kind of unique role or lockdown role for somebody to come in and look at the data, consume the data, but not make actions off of it, not go and change a configuration. And as you look at information like this, think of where your InfoSec team can be looking at these patch vulnerabilities, these CVEs, and looking at the progress, and at the same time working side by side with the IT ops team, where you can go, look, we have a subset of devices, great. Now let's go push that patch. We've done that. You can now start to get more surgical, yes, that's a fun pun here, on which users you need to go handle, right? Maybe it's a particular doctor that simply hasn't booted up their laptop in a while, or a particular workstation on wheels that just seemingly you can't find, right, or hasn't been updated. Again, you can get that much more granular with the data, but again, you're fostering that collaboration because you're able to give InfoSec a limited role to look at this information and work with you in this.
Yeah, and what you guys are seeing here is just a dashboard of what devices may are unpatched or susceptible to a vulnerability that's 7 or higher. A vulnerability 7, 8, or 9 is considered critical. So if we can identify those, then we can create things like automation around those, where I can automatically patch certain vulnerabilities. So you guys see here. if devices are, if a device has any of these CVEs, automatically send it to workspace one and approve the patch, and then workspace one, your MDM or UEM will automatically update that device with the patch. And again, then you can also look at a log and saying, if it doesn't take, retry again and see what logs and history of devices that are and aren't still on there. So some cool things you can do around automations. And just the more important thing I'm trying to get at is it's important to also be able to have a platform that allows you access to this type of data and analytics to make informed decisions around your devices, and just automate things as well. So let me look up battery here. So here's a cool one. So if a battery on a Windows device is less than 35, so that battery is nearing end of life there, automatically create a ServiceNow ticket and send an email out to that user or to that admin. So some good color on some cool automations that we can do that just makes the life as an admin much easier, and allows you to be more proactive of managing your devices and your users.